want to try that if we're on a time traveler, we're traveling back to your past. What kind of who will jump to your mind when you think about in your past? Who are the women who have inspired you to come to this way? Would you like to meet them again, like in your past?
Yeah. Oh, I would love to time travel if we
Yeah.
had the opportunity. Yeah, I mean, I would say I absolutely do. I think some of the people that made an impact on me are, still around me.
Mhm.
And that's a good question because I think often when people get asked these questions,
Yeah.
they're kind of put in the spot to think of someone really famous that's like,
No,
oh,
yeah.
I really looked up to them. But sometimes I think about the people that really inspire you,
Yeah.
right? And these are actually people that you know personally, could be friends or family. And in my situation, there are people from my family. And then I would say the person that I can think of that sort of really, inspired me in the past and still continue to inspire is my grandmother. My grandmother on my mother's side.
Yeah.
So when I grew up, I was growing up. She raised me until I was 7.
Wow.
So when I was growing up with her, she would tell me a lot of stories about when she was a student. It's very fascinating because she was probably born around the 40s in China, and she grew up in a village. So at the time, women in general weren't really given an education, or you typically, I would say, the head of the household, who would be the father, they are not super willing to let the women go to school because it just wasn't very common at the time. But I think my great granddad, he still wanted the girls, like my grandma, to do some learning and to be exposed to education. So I think they had a tutor that came in to teach them things. So initially, I think starting off, a lot of things she learned was like, poetry and like reading through, memorizing poems and stuff like that. And that was education back in like the Republic of Canada, Republic of China time, before the Chinese Communist Party took over. Very, very different time. And then she also told me about her exposure to education after that time. Yeah. And she was telling me how it was so different. You started learning more about science, about maths after, the Civil War, right? And one of the things that she, regretted not doing was not being able to go to university because she absolutely loved learning. Yeah, she loved reading. And even though she told me she had to memorize all these poems, she never regretted any of that. And she even remembered that she had to learn Russian, but she can't remember that anymore. She's like now 94. So yes, but I can imagine how at the time, learning was quite simple. You were just told to memorize things, but she absolutely enjoyed it. And I think hearing about this was really inspiring to me because you think about the resources you have at the time, and people were still so interested in learning about different things. And it kind of opened my eyes to the idea of, things outside of our immediate environment, right? Because she loved knowing about things and just kind of learning different things. She was also very, exactly. I think she was really hands-on as well. So, she would make all these things based on what she's seen. And I think that got me appreciate a lot more about, learning about the world and seeing things around me and then being open to new ideas. So I think that definitely started from a really young age. But I think it definitely kind of planted an interest in just learning about, anything and everything.
I kind of like when we talk about your grandma, especially say it's on your mother's side, it really recalls like you were raised by your grandma until 7, right?
Yeah.
My mom had to leave me with my grandma at the age of 8. So she basically raised me up until I go to university.
I think it's a very Chinese thing as well. Chinese families do that because you have a lot of families that go and work. And because at the time, a lot of these childbearing responsibilities were kind of left to the elderly to help out. And I think that's also part of Chinese culture is that they would offer.
Kind of like we got the experience, we got the time with the grandmother to know their life stories.
Exactly.
Which is completely like alien to us.
Yeah, and you feel like you know so much about your grandparents than sometimes even your own parents because you went through so many fond memories with them as a child.
Yeah, and when you late at night, and you're like, I want to tell more story, and then you get to know a bit more
Yes.
about them and when they were birds.
My grandma absolutely loves telling her
Yeah.
stories too. And I think I'm so glad she has,
Yeah.
because that really is the last generation of people
Mhm.
that's gone through two different eras
Yeah.
in such a short time. I mean,
Yeah.
she's basically seen everything. And you just wouldn't get these stories anymore.
I know.
So we gotta, I think it's so important that we maintain and retain that heritage.
I think it's kind of like, in a way, also women's stories. It's kind of sometimes being told in a way like more like oral history passed on in the family instead of like written in the textbook. Of course, I think gradually I think it's start to change.
Yeah.
To have all this written down and also provide another side of how we understand.
I think you are absolutely right about the idea of having an oral history, because I'm thinking back in the day, a lot of people that had these stories to tell, they weren't recorded because perhaps women didn't have access to record this information.
Yeah.
Or some people didn't know how to write, which can be very common.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is passed down through stories, and nowadays sometimes it's hard to know, right? Like some of these more historical stories, maybe these were actual real events. And we don't even know who these people are, just because sometimes we don't even have their names. So I think it's so important that we retain this information and keep a record of where that comes from, because it just kind of creates a network of, I think, inspirational women that we can look up to, just because it's such a limited space. And it's crazy to say that now that we're in 2024. But it still is, right?
There's still space for the pumpkin to grow.
Yes, absolutely. No, I love that analogy. Yeah.
What about other women in your life?
Yeah.
You travel back, who would you see?
So my aunt, so sadly she's no longer with me. So she passed away when I was 16. And I think the way she inspired me going into what I'm doing today was just kind of really her character. She was a very sociable person, very charming, knew how to navigate various social situations, had friends from all walks of life. And I think, as a child, you're like, wow, this person really knows her way around people and places. And even as an adult, like, that is such an important skill to have, right? And these are skills that it's very difficult to teach. It's more of a skill you pick up through your experiences, right? Through being exposed and being put into situations where you have to learn these things. And I think, that really made me think about being able to get along with others, being able to collaborate with others, which is so important, because a lot of the stuff we do in academia, like research and teaching and, forming new proposals or initiatives, they all come from collaboration, right? They all come from this network of being able to maintain good and friendly relationships with each other and being able to work together, which is so important. And I feel like we don't think as much about that maybe in university, because everybody hates group projects. Yeah.
But in a way, it's kind of, I can see in your publication, you always try to collaborate with people. And also, it's, of course, difficult when it's become group project, because you have to compromise. It won't be you find someone identical, just exactly do what you told. But it's important. As I would say, science is not just one person could do everything.
Yes, exactly. You need a village to do everything you want to do. And I think nowadays, especially with our time being demanded by multiple different things, it's important that we have the right people to do whatever they're known for, and really kind of taking up their expertise to do that. And I think that's, when you have people from different backgrounds come together and work together in a really great way, you can make really, really exciting and cool things happen.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Is there anyone else that you have in mind? We talked about your grandmother, your aunt.
Yeah, and I'll say probably my mom. Yeah, my mother. Not a big surprise there. But I remember when I was a child, so around like 4, it's probably still a toddler around that time. She would buy me these like cassette tapes, and on each cassette tape there would be like 4 to 5 fairy tale stories. Usually there's some kind of theme behind the story, and she'll put them on when I'm about to go to bed. So it's like a bedtime story. It's kind of her way of like, here's some stories you can listen to before going to bed. And I absolutely love them. And thinking back, oh, that was such a good time in my life. The little things, right? And the idea of these kind of stories and listening through these stories really taught me something about storytelling and the process of storytelling. Because if we think about, breaking down the different components in a fairy tale story, you have the big picture, right? You got the problem, you got the characters, you got the conflict, and then the solution and the ending. That's pretty much the same process as you would follow when writing a research article. Right. And I still, even now I tell people, and including my students as well, is when you're drafting a research paper, you are telling a story. Right. And all these components are no different than telling, a fairy tale, bedtime story. So I think that's something that got me thinking about storytelling and the way we can make, research more impactful and also more relatable to a general audience that doesn't know what you're doing or what you're talking about. And I remember later on when I got a bit older, so when I turned 7 and I was able to read and was more, gravitated towards more visual, bits and, coloring books and such, and also, picture books. So I remember fondly, because my mom would love buying me books in general. And she'd always said that as a kid, whenever I cried, she would just give me a book and I would stop crying. So that's apparently what she said. I don't know how much of that is true, but I'll take her word for it, because in my memory, I still remember that I absolutely loved books as a kid. So I remember when I was 7, she bought me a Pokemon counting book. She's bought me many books, but this was quite memorable. And I remember it was a very colorful book, and every page, you would see something like 10 Pikachus, and you have to count the Pikachus and you have to find them. And that was probably the first time when I realized, okay, numbers, they can be kind of fun. And maths, I wasn't really into maths. I wasn't really into mathematics at the time. And I think this is a nice way maybe to get kids to kind of appreciate numbers and maths a little bit more. But that really got me thinking about numbers. And, thinking now about what I do. Essentially what I am doing is, storytelling with numbers. And data are, it basically is just a bunch of numbers put together, and we're kind of taking those numbers and putting that into a story. And, when I was 7, obviously, it was, putting the numbers and making it into a Pokemon story. And I really appreciated that. And I think, these little moments in your life when you think back really all contribute to the things you enjoy and you enjoy looking at today.
I think it's really warming story to know about this, because for me, when you talk about this, it breaks a lot of stereotypes of how Asian mom treats their daughter and ask them to memorize everything. No, it's not. It's just it could be that just this is what you like, and I try to bring in something very smartly with what I want you to know a bit about math. I don't want to push you to memorize everything. You could go with what you like. Also make connections with something. 10 Pokemon, not just this Pokemon to draw them.
I think with Asian mothers, it's definitely a tough love relationship. They show love in different ways, and there's definitely moments, where they express their love in different ways. A lot of times I think parents think, gifting an educational material is helpful, but I think I was quite lucky in the fact that my mom was very creative with the stuff that she got me, and it was a way that kind of got me to be more motivated or more interested in learning about things that I didn't initially particularly enjoy.
I think that's very interesting with your grandmother, with the aunt, and your mother, as kind of helps me to also think about my life as well. We see how these women, these strong women in our life. Similarly, I have my aunt with my mom's younger sister, my grandmother on my mother's side, and my mom. They're different, very different people.
From very different people, different backgrounds.
But their love for you and the way they live their life and show, because you're around as a younger relative, you see, oh, actually, that's possible. I can do
Yes.
things.
And the way they leave their mark on you in such subtle ways that you don't even notice yourself until much later. Then you think, okay, you know what? Actually, why would I do that? Or why would I think that? Or why would I behave like that? I think that all comes to the people that you have lived with or that you have grown under and been spending a lot of time with. So absolutely, I think it's such a magical and a thing to cherish, really.
And it's lovely to know all the stories.
Yeah, no, it's definitely great to reflect because sometimes when you're not thinking about this, you don't actually think about the fact that all these things can have this indirect impact on you.
That's what I think. It's kind of like, even although this is not a research project, it's kind of you ask the questions that help you to think again, to reimagine what you experience, and try to make the connections of the past to who you are today. And even by doing that, you see that actually it all makes sense now.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is the real impact that we can see and feel. Right. And I think sometimes, when we think about inspirational people, we can look at them and think, wow, but that might not have that level of impact. And it's often, like I mentioned, those people that are closest to you that have the most direct impact on yourselves.